Okay, so this is my car that's been having the problem with the transmission light errors. I'm going to show you shortly how I diagnose the problem. Okay, I've just been messing around with my car. I've got a Mazda 3 2010 model, and it's been having a number of gearbox issues with various fault codes turning up. Most of them to do with the transmission, well, not so much the transmission, but the actual components that are, or the electronic components that are connected to the gearbox, that it's saying that various ones are faulty, which they aren't. And typically what it turns out to be when you have this problem with the Mazda 3 series is this module here called the TCM, or Transmission Control Module. They have numbers on the side of them. The last two digits, as far as I can tell, are part of the series. So if the first series of digits are the same and the last two digits are different, so for example 1F, 1D, 1E and so on, those digits don't really matter so much, so long as you have the corresponding next one up in the level. So if you had a D, then an F will be fine, but they're not intermatchable in other ways as far as I can tell so far. They can be repaired. There are people who repair them, but getting them repaired in Australia seems to be, well, I found it to be a bit of a hassle. There's dealers. The dealers don't seem to know what they're talking about, so I don't really have a whole lot of trust there. And there was also talk of $850 maybe to fix one, when you can buy a brand new one for $1,200 or $1,500 depending on where you go. So I don't want to spend that kind of money. I've managed to get a second-hand one. Now I'm going to show you guys why these things fail. Well, not so much why they fail inside, but the reason why they fail. They're basically mounted underneath the battery box on top of the transmission, and it's a terrible place. They just get no cooling and they just get baked, and over, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years, and sometimes less, depending on if you're doing a lot of Ks, they get cooked and they just stop working, and then you have to send them away and they get dismantled, or you buy a new one and you put a new one in. But there's talk of these things failing within a year of owning a car, which is shocking. So I'll show you what I've done to solve this problem and how I've solved it. So the TCM gets mounted basically underneath this battery box on top of the case. I'll pull it out in a minute and I'll show you. You basically have to remove your airbox. It's not a big deal actually to get this stuff out. It's just a fiddly job. You got to disconnect various things like your ECU harness, but it's a fairly average job, a fairly easy job. I did this pretty much with some 10mm sockets here, little drivers, this kind of gear, screwdriver, pair of pliers. It's pretty much all that's required to get the thing out. It's not too bad. Okay, so the transmission control module is normally mounted underneath here. So if I pull back a little bit actually so you can see, so this is underneath the battery box. You've got your gearbox mount or your engine mount, or one of the side engine gearbox mount there, and then directly underneath it is the TCM, and it's held in by 3 screws. There's one on that side, one at the back down there somewhere, and there's one off to that side. Now the one that the bolt that's actually just underneath here is a little bit of a pain in the ass to get it. You've got to have quite small hands and you've got to sort of fiddle around to get that one undone. The other two are quite easy to get undone, but that one underneath there is quite difficult. So what we're going to do is we're going to remount this, and I'll show you what I've done. So what I've done here is I've made a bracket and I've mounted the TCM on the back of the battery box. So now it won't be overheated, and I'll show you. I'm going to fit that in a minute. We'll get it in there and I'll show you how it all works. Okay, so I've remounted TCM now. You can see my screws through the back of the battery box here, holding that bracket in there, and there's the TCM. It's a little bit difficult when you have to mount the connector on the bottom here, because as you can see, the dipstick thing for this dipstick here for the automatic transmission is kind of in your way a little bit, but it's not impossible. You just basically, before you screw your battery box back down, you put that clamp up, the connector on the bottom of the TCM, connect it up, and then you're done. And the interesting thing is, Mazda have put their the ECU for the car is on the side of the gearbox, on the side of the battery box, out of the way of the heat, but the TCM, which is expensive, if you have to replace it, is mounted right on top of the gearbox, right where all the heat is, underneath the battery box, and a standard installation. So I've heard of other people zip tying the TCM to the lines that run through there, the hose lines and the brake lines and so on, or the fuel lines that run through the back of the engine. But I think this is probably a better installation. It's in there pretty solidly. It's not going to move around or vibrate around or anything like that, which is good. I'll let you know how I get on when I start the car. Okay, so we have no more check engine lights on the dash, no more AT light on the dash, which kept coming and going anyway, but the engine light was pretty much consistently on. And I was looking at the fault codes. I'll show you the fault codes shortly and how I check those, but it's all looking good so far. It feels nicer, it's a little bit smoother. One of the things that I did learn while doing this exercise is that some of the sensors that go to the TCM can actually affect your idle, so it can feel like your car's missing a little bit. I'm still going to do the coils in this car because I've almost done 170,000 Ks now, so I'll do all the coils and I'll do an oil change and everything shortly, and I'll do the auto transmission fluid and everything else as well. I'll do all the major service stuff, but otherwise the car's pretty good. I'll show you the TCM, I'll show you how it looks when it's all together. So that's it, fully mounted with the car running. I've just only driven it, forward and backwards around here so far, but we'll be driving a little bit further shortly. Looks pretty good, pretty tidy, pretty happy with it really. Potentially too, the other thing is you could potentially maybe even change your TCM out if you needed to a bit more easily with it being in that location. You'd have to use a long screwdriver to get at the other bolt and things. It could be a little bit difficult, but it could probably be done. Whereas in the standard location it definitely cannot be done. Okay, for fault codes in this car, the OB2 box is just located underneath there, which is where your mechanic would plug in and get all their readings from. And you can buy one of these units. This unit was pretty cheap, I think about 30 bucks or something like that. You can buy a slightly more expensive one or a slightly cheaper one, just depending on what you want to do. This one's pretty good, it can do most things. You can, depending on what software you're running. I'm running software to my phone, but you can run software on your laptop, which is a little bit more intuitive and a little bit better. And you can kind of see what's going on the fly. So we'll plug this in and I'll show you how it works. So it's plugged in now. You can see a little light. You can leave it plugged in all the time if you want to. Oh, it's a little bit hard to see the light here because we've got it so bright here. And then when we start the car, it'll start reading out the codes. So that's now connected to the car. As soon as the car is going, it can read the codes, and the codes will read back to the phone. I can't show you that here at the moment because obviously I'm using the phone to record the video. But what I'll do when I get home is I'll get the Pro out and I'll show you actually how it actually works and what codes we're getting and how to reset the codes of the car as well. Okay, so I've got my phone here, and now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how the codes are diagnosed. So basically you download an application, this car scanner application here. You're going to see this really clearly because we have pretty terrible light in here, but hopefully you can. And you have to connect, so you have to have your Wi-Fi turned on, and then you connect to the module. And you can connect actually a couple of different ways, but I usually connect via Wi-Fi. And what's going to happen is that's going to connect to the car. And now what we can do is we can do a whole bunch of diagnostic here. We can look at the real-time stats of the car, various styles, real-time graphs which you can set up yourself, how the car's running, volts and so on, whatever you want. Going back, we can look at live data. We can set the live data up however we want, turn things on and off. We can look at the MAF rate, say for example, we can turn it on, and then we can see everything in real life, so while the car's actually running. On a laptop, of course, you could do this stuff much better in a much better fashion, because you'd actually be able to have a much bigger screen to work from, which is much nicer. You can record your data, you can do emissions tests, acceleration tests. I don't bother to do most of that. Most of the stuff that we're interested in at home is going to be diagnostic trouble codes. So we go into that. You have to set this up for your car too. So it is actually set up for my car. It's fairly easy to do that. You just go through a couple of steps that ask you what your car is. You put it in, and then away you go. So now what we can do is we can read the stats. It takes a minute or so for this to happen. and in a minute we'll have the reading. And there we go. We've got no more codes in this scanner at all. No more codes in the computer. So I'll show you the codes that I had before. I had a number of codes related to various things, and all of them seem to stem actually from the TCM. The TCM was throwing all the codes. So, you know, the thing is, if you were looking for the fault for the first time, you might be confused and you might think, oh man, I've got a whole lot of things to replace, but in actual fact it actually can be the TCM or the ECU that can actually cause those problems. So you have to be a little bit aware, especially with a transmission. If you're looking at a lot of transmission faults, then you would probably assume that it's very unlikely that all of those modules would all go wrong, or all those electronic components would all go wrong at once. It's far more likely to be either an ECU or a TCM type style fault. So I'll include the fault codes that I was getting with mine. They're all gone now. The car's running pretty good. My next job on this car is going to replace the coils, because the coils are getting old. I feel a little bit of a miss in the car every now and again. One was already replaced by the Mazda dealership, but they typically only replace one when, as a proper mechanic, you'd do the whole lot. You wouldn't just replace one, because you know they're all breaking down at the same time. So I'm going to do all four of them. I'll keep the old ones just in case I ever need another one, but I'm going to replace all four. They're pretty cheap. I'll show you how to buy them, what they cost. This, out of interest, cost me $300 for a second-hand TCM, which is it's a reasonable price. I wouldn't really want to pay more than that for a second-hand one, because you don't really know what the condition of it's going to be. The ideal is to get a new one, really, but I was just being cheapskate. So anyway, that's my fix for this problem. I'll talk to you guys soon. Well, since doing this fix on the TCM in my car, I've been driving around for a good couple of weeks, and I thought I'd better do an update as to how things are going along. So since resetting the fault codes, changing the TCM over, and changing the position of where it is in the engine, I've had no more problems with the car. The car's been running pretty smoothly. As I've sort of said in the past in the video, the choice of Mazda to locate the TCM in that particular location seems like a poor choice. I'm pretty sure that's really why the thing fails. It's just really, it just is in a place that's too hot, and it does get baked. Now the thing is that there are a couple of things to do with the TCM that we should probably talk about. One of them is that the recommendation by Mazda when you replace the TCM is that it should be programmed. So, and in fact, anything to do with the gearbox or to do with the solenoids, if you ever drain the gearbox and replace solenoids or do anything like that, apparently you're supposed to retrain the gearbox. Mazda have a piece of software similar to the AB2 software that I have, but a little bit more intuitive than that. They run it on a laptop or on a diagnostic tool, a big screen, and they can set it up, and they can actually reprogram your gearbox. And the talk of the town, really, or certainly from a Mazda perspective, is that if you change TCM, you should also program the new TCM and reprogram it so that it learns all where to change the gears and things. But a lot of people online are saying that's a waste of time. I haven't done it. I haven't really noticed any bad changes. I mean, there was definitely having bad changes before I changed it, so it was a problem, but since changing it hasn't really been a problem. But maybe that's something you want to consider. You can talk to Mazda about that. Now, what Mazda say with the TCM is they say that you should buy a new one. The local Mazda close to me said it's $1,500 for the TCM plus the labour to fit it. They reckon it's 3 or 4 hours worth of labour, so and they need to program it and so on. That's what they will tell you. Actually, in the Mazda manual itself, it says that you don't need to program it if you do this, but it says that if you replace the solenoids or if you drain the oil, you do need to program the unit. So it's a little bit conflicting, but I guess the guys at Mazda probably know what they're talking about, and probably it is better if you program it. Certainly if you put a new TCM in there from Mazda, you probably need to have that program, because it won't have the programming code in. So you can imagine that if you go to Mazda and you buy the TCM and then you have them program it and you have them do the fitting of it and so on, you're going to be up for at least $2,000 and possibly more. So most people, I guess, with a slightly older car, it's a 2010, I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be spending that kind of money on the car when it's I've got close to 170,000 k's on it, and they devalue pretty quickly. So the idea of spending $2,000+ on it certainly didn't excite me. So the TCM cost secondhand. I managed to, they seem to have a lot of different price ranges when you look online. I got mine for $300. I shopped around a lot. It came with a guarantee. You know, they were happy that if I took it away and it wasn't working, or if it broke down, you know, in a few months, they'd replace it. So, and it came out of a later model car, which was good, with lower Ks, which was also good. But the thing is that you know, some places are charging up to $800 for these modules, and certainly $600 for a second-hand module, or $500 for a second-hand module seems to be quite normal in Australia. And I just think that's way out of the question. You just don't want to be spending that kind of money on a second-hand module. And then the only other option is if you don't want to do this dealership thing, and you don't want to buy one second-hand, and you really want to be kind of have a little bit more reliability, might be the cost of actually repairing your TCM. So they can be repaired. As far as I can tell, there's only one or two places that do it properly in Australia, and I suspect that a lot of the smaller places that do it probably don't do it themselves. They probably all send it to the one main place to have it done, and they're probably just like dealers basically. But the problem is that the main place that actually does the TCM repairs is a wholesaler. You can't really talk to them. It's hopeless. I spent a lot of time trying to contact them, and they were just didn't want to know. They just want you to deal with their dealerships, and the dealerships that they use are typically Repco, Bursons, and places like that. And what I found when I was dealing with those places was that they just didn't have a clue what was going on at all. I mean, you've got guys behind a counter in Repco or in Bursons, and they're just not dealing with this stuff often enough to be able to really help you, or to be knowledgeable about the actual what to expect if you actually have it repaired. The actual place that does the repairs was saying, oh, you know, we'll guarantee it'll all be okay, but then Bursons was saying to me that you know, it wasn't uncommon for people to spend $800 and still be not happy. So it just was a lot of conflicting information, and I wasn't happy to spend that kind of money with perhaps the chance of it being a problem, so I decided not to do that. So the lack of knowledge around TCM seems to be fairly high. Luckily, there's a lot of information online. A lot of people have had these problems, so that does help solve it a little bit. Now, the other thing is that obviously, if you get your check engine light coming on, which you do, and because it starts to think that it's got fault codes problems, and that brings your engine light on. Quite often what happens is you also get an AT light warning coming on, and the AT light warning is quite serious, because when the TCM can't actually decipher the information properly between the ECU and the input-output speed of the gearbox, then what's going to happen is, or what could happen is, it could actually crash the gearbox into the wrong gear, and it could damage your gearbox. So it's pretty uncool to be driving around when you've got that light coming on. My light only came on a couple of times, and it came on and it went off, and it would never stay on. But the engine light was on pretty consistently for, you know, a good couple of weeks while I tried to figure out how to fix this the most economical way, and it was quite frustrating. But yeah, ideally you don't want to be driving your car. Once the AT light comes on, you do not want to be driving your car. You want to really just, you know, either send it to someone and get it sorted, or sort it yourself and try and sort it as quickly as you can. Do not drive it like that, because worst case scenario, what's going to happen is you're going to trash your gearbox as well as the TCM being trashed already, and then you're going to be up for the cost of the TCM plus the cost of the gearbox, and then you're definitely going to have to get the TCM program, because the gearbox is going to be different and so on. So they generally kind of like matched pairs. So you really, and it's a lot of work. You really don't want to go to that hassle, even though you could, even though you can get a gearbox easy enough for a Mazda 3. It's the inconvenience of the whole thing. Whole weekend, replacing gearboxes is never good. So I would suggest that if your AT light's coming on and you suspect that the TCM is part of this problem, sort it out quickly. Now there's a speed sensor. I'll tell you what codes I was getting, because I was getting a number of codes. The main one I was getting is P0791, and this one was coming up really consistently, and this is what they call the intermediate shaft speed sensor circuit malfunction. Now this intermediate shaft speed sensor, there's two actual speed sensors in there, but this is the main one, and both of them are quite common to fail. This particular one is the most common one to fail, and what happens when this fails is this can bring the AT light on as well. So if you're only getting, say, one fault or two faults in it related to this kind of thing, you probably want to spend the money and fix the sensor. I bought one of these sensors because I thought, well, I don't want to be replacing everything else and then get down to the point of, maybe $50 worth of sensor or $100 worth of sensor and then still have a problem. So I thought I'd buy one, but actually my problem did go away when I replaced the TCM. But I had a whole bunch of other faults as well. So that's one of the main ones. I found that part, interestingly enough, for about, I think it was about $39 delivered, something like that. It was less than $40. It was pretty cheap, but they vary in price depending on where you buy them. I didn't get I don't think I got a price from Mazda for this sensor, but I would imagine Mazda, it's going to be $150 plus for a sensor like that typically. The other types of faults that I was getting related to this were the U0402, which is invalid data received from the transmission control module, and this is a very, very common fault as well. And these faults that start with U0402 and so on. Usually what will happen when the TCM goes bad, or if it goes really bad, is that you get this problem completely and an AT light comes on permanently and your car can go into what they call limp mode, where it gets stuck in third gear and it just won't change at all because it's trying to protect itself from bad changes and things in this. And that's typically what happens to the Mazda 3, is that that TCM fails completely. You get a code where it can't talk to it can't talk to the TCM anymore. It can't read the data properly, and you have a massive problem. So, I was getting one of those codes, but unfortunately it wasn't quite to that level where it was a real disaster. What else were we getting? We were getting a number of failures. Tests failed where I couldn't really get the data back properly. Let me just go to the next page. Oh, this was the other one, P0841, and this was to do with transmission fluid pressure. So it was saying also that I had a transmission fluid pressure sensor warning. So, so I was getting, it was probably about sort of 8 warnings that I was getting in relation to the gearbox, and I just sort of thought, well, it's very unlikely that I have all of these sensors all suddenly fail, and the car was running, up until the point of having this problem, it was running pretty good, and then we suddenly start having all these sensors all sort of starting to supposedly fail. Now, it could be a harness actually, because harnesses actually can cause a problem as well, or if the car's been through water or too much water and water's got into the connectors, it can corrode the connectors. That's another thing that can happen and does happen. But that wasn't the case on this car. That was pretty clean under the bonnet. When I pulled the plugs apart, they were all super clean. And I just sort of thought, well, it'd be very unlikely for all these sensors to all be faulty all at once. It's far more likely that the module that reads the data from the sensors is faulty. So yeah, that's kind of how I diagnosed the problem. I mean, it was a bit of guesswork there, but I've managed to solve it, and it all seems to be pretty good. I mean, I guess I'm not going to know how this pans out over the long term until I've had it in the car for a year or so. And whether I have the car that long or not is another thing. Maybe I have a car for a year. Typically, I only have a car for 6 months to a year, or 2 years at the very most, and then I usually sell it and I move on and I change. One of the things I do find with my Mazda 3 is that I've got a couple of kids, and it's a problem. It's a little bit too small for me. It's trying to get the family in there and shopping trolley stuff and all the rest. It's just a hassle basically, because it's a little bit of a small car, but it's reasonably cheap on gas. So that was the idea when I bought it. So yeah, that's it. Oh, one other thing I should mention actually is that Mazda also did say if I was to spend the money with them and get them to do the job, that because I was concerned, obviously they're just going to mount the new transmission module in the same place. They were saying they offer a lifetime guarantee. I mean, as to what a lifetime guarantee means, maybe that means 100,000 k's, maybe it means 50,000 k's. I don't know. You'd need to question that stuff with them. But they were saying they offer a lifetime guarantee if they fit it and program it. But if you bought it and you fitted it and programmed it yourself, they wouldn't offer any guarantee at all. Whether they can actually do that under the Australian consumer law, I have a doubt. But anyway, that's pretty much what they had to say. So, if you want to go down that route, maybe it's worth talking to your Mazda dealer and seeing what sort of agreement you can cut with them, and how much money they can steal off you doing it. But anyway, hopefully this helps someone else. I spent a good week sort of researching this and trying to figure out what to do and how to fix it. So hopefully it can cut your time down and you can get your one fixed much faster than what I do with mine. So if you like my videos, subscribe, follow me. I always have something I'm doing, usually to do with motorbikes. It's unusual for me to doing car stuff. Actually, I've got a couple of transit vans that I'm working on at the moment as well, so probably we're going to film some of the transit van stuff as well. One of those transit vans is quite interesting because it has a thing called an ASM, so which is another big nightmare of a system. But anyway, that's in another video, and we'll get to that when we make one. But have a good night or a day or whatever it is in your neighbourhood, and we'll talk again soon.